All right. Well, what's up, guys? I haven't made a tutorial in a while, but that's because I've been cooking up some stuff in the background. I have made I think like one, two. Yeah, that's like 1, 2, 3. I think it's like 3. I think it's like 3. I don't know. It's like 3. I think I've made like 7, or like 8 new renders since I last made my last 2 tutorials. But I haven't made any tutorials since then. And I guess over this next couple week or two, I'm gonna see if I can try to crack it down on making these tutorials for you guys. So recently on my Instagram, I did like a little experiment, I guess, where I posted on my story that if one of my followers, I would pick 5 random people to choose from, and these 5 random people could submit a song that they like and a theme that they like. And based off the song and the theme that they chose, I would make a render based off of, what I felt like the vibe would be. And so for this one, I chose, one of my followers chose the song To Die Without Scars, and I think it was a euphoric, sad cyberpunk theme. So yeah, here is the tutorial for the To Die Without Scars render. I hope it's easy to understand and hope you guys enjoy. All right, so here is the project file for the render. I try to organize everything in the workflow order of how I usually make these type of renders. Keep in mind, making a still image is a lot. I mean, it's not too much, but I make it differently than how I make my video renders. It's different. But here is the breakdown for it. All right, so turning off all of these different layers, let me show you what I started with. Okay, so this is what I started off with. I made this building, or I didn't make the building. I bought the building a while ago, but I textured it myself. And I just placed it in here as a basis for the foreground of the building. You could do this with literally any other building that just has some nice roof re-roll, like some AC units on top, whatever. I don't know. Just choose whatever building you want as the foreground and work on that first, and work on the composition in the shot that you're going to try to go for. This was the shot that I went for, the angle that I went for. I wanted to kind of get the detail on the ground. And then I also used I used a fisheye lens, panoramic lens on the camera. So you would get kind of like this curved warping effect. You can see it better right here. But I used this effect because I wanted to get the entire city, all the way up to the sky, into the frame of the picture. All right, so once I was satisfied with the composition, the camera angle that I had, I started working on just the foreground details of the building up here. And I know since it's a low, close to the ground shot, I wanted a lot of detail on the ground. So I used a combination, I just used a combination of 2 techniques. The first one was just photo scans. You can get these online. I can search up here, I don't know, rocky ground, and there's a bunch of photo scans that I could use. You could also use free ones. This is paid for. You can use free ones on different websites. I use the same thing for this edge trash, the trash near the edge of it. It was just more rocks. And then the final layer for the ground, I used a texture. The texture was just this. This texture was the displacement texture I used for the ground. And it was from Megascans, and I just placed it in there. I cranked up the roughness to make it more shiny, more wet from rain and stuff. Made the displacement really low. And you can make this as rough as you want, and you can get a 4K texture, so it's not as spiky, to make it more detailed. I just placed that in there and kind of leveled it with the ground so it would all mix in together really well. And that's just all I did for the foreground rocks right there. And then the next thing I did was just place some more, a little bit of detail on the wall. I just placed 2 decals, I think. There's 1 decal right there, 1 decal right there. You can see them both right there. Just for a little bit of extra detail. And then this door was from textures.com. It's just a flat 2D image, but you can extrude it to make it look 3D. You see, the errors in the texture. It will not look stupid. But from this far, it looks great. Just gave a little bit of a nice texture on there, and it looks fine. And then lastly is the exact same method for the door, but is a lot more detailed, was the fuse box right here. Same thing, just got, you know, texture from textures.com, extruded it, messed with the textures a little bit, and I got a pretty good texture going for the fuse box. And that's really all I did for the foreground. Next thing was the character. I've used this character in a lot of different projects. I used them in my trance one and in my Echoes of the Void one, but I just posed them differently. Had him holding the gun, bring out the sword, make him look cool. That's really about it. That's all I did for the character. I'm pretty sure this character was like $8. I can link it in the description, but you can use literally any other free character model that you can guys find. The next thing I added was just the city floor texture, and for this I just got a picture of a bird's eye view of a city, plugged the emission, or plugged the color into the emission and the base color, gave it a blue tint with the multiply, with the mixed color multiply, gave it that blue tint, and it's really all I did. Nothing more to it. The next things I added were the buildings that I made. So we have these ones right here. I've used these all in previous projects, but the only one that is new is this one right here. And I can go over how I made this building, because I actually really like the way I made this building, and the texture work I did for it. It was really nice. So I can show you that in a sec. But here the composition was just everything that's outside of the camera you don't really need to worry about. All you need to make is what is in front of the camera. Like you can see, like this building, it doesn't even touch the ground. You can see they're like, you know, they're floating buildings. But as long as you can see it in the foreground in the camera, you don't see the bottom of the building, you just see the top. That's really all that matters in these type of renders. And as the camera points up, the buildings also go up with it. As for this building though, I can show you guys how I made this building, because this building was actually really fun to make. I really liked making it. So let me show you the techniques that I used. All right, so here is the building that I made for this project. It was just one building, but the method that I used to make this, the method that I used to make this building, I will most likely use in every single one of my projects going forward, because making this building was really fun, and it makes it look good from afar and up close. So the first thing I did was I just went through my Pinterest board and looked through my reference buildings to find you know some good building to kind of replicate. I did that for this building right here, but I basically did the exact same thing and I used this building instead. You could see, you know, the resemblance. And making this building was actually really easy, really fun. Yeah, so I think I just started off with a cube, really simple shapes, kind of modeled the layout of the building like this, and then I started making loop cuts for all the places where there are indents into the buildings based off the reference images. There's one at the top, there's one in the middle, and there's one for the windows. I made one loop cut at the top, like right around there, maybe there'd be good. One loop cut in the middle, and then 2 loop cuts for the windows. There's actually a third one because the windows don't go all the way into the middle of the building. They stop right about there. And then with the loop cuts, if you hit Control B on Windows, I don't know what it is for Mac, or you can bevel the loop to make 2. You can, you know, make it right around there, move it up a little bit, and then if you hit Alt E, you can extrude along normals, and it would, instead of scaling, or instead of when you press E, you know, you can only extrude it on one axis like that. But if you do Alt E and extrude along the normals, it extrudes in every, you know, which direction like that. But before you make any extrusions, you'll want to apply the scale. And the reason why is because whenever you make an extrusion, it'll be, you know, 2 of the sides will be way longer than the other 2 sides. And to fix that, all you have to do is really just apply the scale. I do object, apply, and scale, but when you do that, it fixes the issue of all, and you can see it scales evenly now. So that's all it did. I just extruded it inwards like this a little bit. So then same thing with the middle part. You can just go in and highlight. To highlight all of one line, you hold Alt and then you click on the line that you want to highlight. It highlights the whole loop like that. And then you would just hit Control B and then Alt E and extrude on normals and then indent it like that. But in this case, the buildings, it goes a little bit to the left actually. So I would just highlight this, move it over, around here would be good. I'll grab both those. Do that. And then once I got what I'm satisfied with, again, Control B to bevel it. And then do that. And there you go. Got a nice little indented part right there. And it's the same thing with these windows. I would just highlight all the window faces and then Alt E and shoot them in just like that. And then for this part that sticks out, actually, I would just click on the the insetted face, or click on the face I want to inset, and then click I, and then you can get roughly the shape that you want. You can make it smaller, you can make it wider, doesn't matter. And then this one is just a simple extrude. You don't have to do along normals. You can do that if you want though, but you can just click E. And then I would loop cut this part right here, and then highlight the part I still want extruded. So it'd be around this part right here. To kind of make it more sticking out. Extrude along normals, and there you go. Super simple geometry. And same thing with the roof. It's just highlight the roof, and then when you click I, you'll probably get this going on. But if you click I again, it extrudes or it insets all the connected faces. The E to extrude down a little bit. I got a nice little simple building going on. The next thing I worked on was the windows right here. Usually I would use a different method to make the windows, but for this instance, I used one particular method, and it was the same thing on how to make the fuse box and the door. I would just get an image texture from textures.com, and I would loop cut all of the faces so I can show you what I mean by that. So just get an image of like a high rise, just like this, and I would loop cut all of the places where the windows are bright, and usually for these high rise images you can see where the line is, where the floor and the ceilings are in these images, and you can just loop cut based off of those, where those are, so you can see what I mean here. There we go. So I just did this really fast, but you just once you loop cut all the places and kind of box all the places where you want extruded, you just click on those boxes just like this, most of the floors that you want extruded, and then inset them or extrude them, and then you got a little bit of a 3D going on. And then while you have these windows still highlighted when you extruded, if you hit Control I, you can invert the selection and apply a different texture to it. So you can apply like any metal texture, just like that. And that's all I did for this one right here, except I applied my own custom metal texture right here. And if you make sure also when you're doing this that you add parts for it to connect at the bottom and the top, you can see that when you click the array modifier, when you apply an array modifier, it will seamlessly stack onto each other, and you can make them as far and as long as you want, just like this. Okay. Looks very nice. So you can see here, this was the texture for the windows right here. You can see how whenever I array it, you can see there's tiling in the windows, and it doesn't look that great, and especially from afar, not all the windows would be lit. So I wanted kind of more random variation between which windows were bright and which windows weren't. So here's the method of how I did that. It was really super simple setup. Don't worry about this. This is just don't worry about these textures right here. These textures are just for making the windows shiny, rough. That's all it does. It's really just a really simple noise modifier, just like this, with a color ramp going through it, so I can crank whichever ones I want brightest. So whatever is white with the noise texture and will be bright, whatever is black will not be shown. You can mess with like the detail, the roughness value right here. I don't know what this does. Wow, that looks weird. What the? So here I can kind of show you what it did for the variation in the windows. So all you would really do is you'd usually just have your textures and just like that. But to add variation, you can just add a simple noise texture, nothing too crazy. And then to add the map range and the geometry node, or the texture coordinate node, I mean, you could just hit Control T and it would bring up the mapping and texture coordinate node. Or you could just manually type it in and just get a mapping node. Oh, that's UV map. Just get a nice mapping node, and then same thing, texture coordinate node. Just plug those in. And then next you would get, you know, a color ramp so you can mess with the strength of the noise texture. And then lastly is you would get a mix color node and change it to from mix to multiply. And you plug that in between the base color and the color of the emission. And then plug the color of the noise texture, the color ramp, into there. And make sure the factor is cranked all the way up to 100. Now you can mess with the variation of the windows. Crank up the black value and crank up the white value. And you can see we already got some variation. You can mess with the scale right here. And you see in the rendered view, you can see how that affects the render. And it looks pretty nice, especially from afar. And you can see the more you mess with the noise modifier, the more you can get any kind of variation you want. And if you change the noise modifier, the noise texture, from 3D to 4D, it will add a new value, and it's W. It's just your seed. So you can mess with all different types of seeds, like that. But that's all I did for the noise modifier. But one of the problems that I came across was that because the windows for the building weren't just one side, they're also this side and the back side. When I duplicated the asset and made it kind of into a cube in a box shape, like this, because it is ungenerated, but you duplicated just the asset itself and not really the generation itself. Whenever you mess with the variation with the noise modifier, it applies it to the whole thing. It makes it look like this. I don't really know how to describe what this is, but you get tiling in the texture. And usually for situations like this, you don't really want tiling because it looks repetitive. One of the things you can mess with is the texture coordinate node. You can plug the UV into the vector of the mapping, and you can see how that affects it. Just plug the object into the vector, and you can see how that affects it. And it's still not the greatest. There's still tiling. So keep it on object and instead add a cube into here. And then with the object still plugged into the vector, pick any cube you want into the scene. Just like that. And however you mess with this cube, it also messes with the texture. And see, because of that, we have no more tiling anymore. So now you can mess with the scale as much as you want, and you won't get that tiling anymore. Just like that. So now the final product looks pretty good. And you can also delete the cube whenever you're satisfied with what you like as well. And that's really all I did for the windows right here. The next thing I did was the texture for the building. And the texture for the building actually has a lot of work put into it. Let me see if I can try to break it down for you pretty easily. All right, so here is the original texture for the building. I just got this free texture from textures.com. I think it was a like painted gun or something like that, like gun paint, or I don't know, it was something like that. It was just a regular black metal texture, and that's what I used for the base texture. The next thing I added to the texture to give it a little bit more detail was just some basic metal scratches. When I plugged the texture for the scratches, here it is right here. This is just what it looks like. And then I plugged the noise modifier, mixed it with a subtract. I only got certain parts of the building that I wanted the scratches to show. And then when I plugged that into a mix node, setting it to add, I mixed both the roughness of the original texture and the scratches texture, and plugged that into the roughness, and I got kind of this nice, scratches variation texture. The next thing I added was sci-fi paneling, so you can see how that is looking right there. And that already gives it a whole lot of detail that you wouldn't normally get in most textures. You can see how that affects the building right there. And it looks nice. It looks really nice. And here's the texturing for it. This looks complicated, but I promise you it's not as complicated as you may think. So for this texture, I still wanted the original normal map of the original gun texture, the metal gun texture, but I also wanted to mix in the normal map of this other texture I found online. It was this sci-fi tile texture, and I wanted to mix in the normal map of that texture in with the gun texture that I already had, but there wasn't really an easy way to do it. So I looked up another tutorial on how to mix normal maps together like that, and here's the method that I found best works. So you get each of the normal maps that you want, so the original normal map of the metal texture and the normal map you want to mix it with. You plug them into their own separate RGB, separate color node right here. You'd get one texture, or you get the original texture normal, plug it into its own, and then the texture normal you want to use, plug it into its own. And you would get a mixed color node, and switching it to add, you would put one red of the original normal into the A factor, and then you would get the red of the normal you want to add on top into the B factor, and you would do that for every single one. So same with the green right here, plug in the green of the original normal into the middle one, plug in the green of the new normal to the middle, and then same with the bottom one right there. And then after you got them all separated, you combine them back together using a combine color node, and then you would plug that into a bump node, and then the bump node would go into the normal, and you kind of get this nice paneling on the texture. And you can use this with literally any other texture. I think with the sci-fi panel texture, I cranked down the normal map. I cranked down the bump map for it, so it's only the darkest parts of the image that show. You can see how it affects it like that. So I just wanted the lines, and that was it, and that was the best result that I got. The next part I did was I added Edgewear to the building, and you can kind of see how in the texture viewport you don't really see too much, but in the render viewport you can see the difference that it makes. You see on the edges of the building, see this texture right here. This is the edgewear that I added, the next part. The base texture just looked like this, but with the edgewear it gives it a lot more variation, and especially from like these parts right here, it looks really good. Here is the texture that I used. It was just a basic normal bare metal texture. Just made it a little bit more darker and made it more not as shiny. You can see that right there, and that's all I did that's all the texture was. But for the mask of the texture, to make it show along only the edges, here is the node setup for that. So you would basically just get a mix shader, combine the metal texture and the texture of the building, combine them to mix shader. And then for the mask, the first thing you would add is two bevel nodes. One of them, the top one is at 8 samples, the bottom one's at 2 samples. Keep it low, kind of just exactly like this. And then with the map range node, you can kind of mess with the range of the texture. You can mess with all these different kinds of settings right here. I got this all from another video on YouTube. I can link it into the description. It was really helpful, and it was perfect for this type of building that I made. But this is a whole node setup right here. So you can get, you know, a regular texture, any texture, the bevel nodes, mixed color, changing the difference, separating only the value, and then plugging that in to the mix shader, the factor of the mix shader. And then you got a nice little edgewear going on. The next thing I added was like these lights on the building, like these sci-fi lights. So you can see it right here. You see like these little lights right here. For the lights, it was fairly simple. It was just I found online like the sci-fi detail map. I forgot where I got it from. It was so long ago. But I just plugged that into an emission. So you can crank up the emission. You can see the sci-fi light showing a lot more. But I remember with the sci-fi map, like everything that wasn't emission was black, and I was like, I only wanted the lights to show. So because the rest of the image was black, it acts as a really good mask. So again, I just got the same texture and plugged it into the factor, and then with just the color ramp, you can tweak as much stuff as you want. So you can see right here, you can see how it affects it, the mask right there. And that is the whole texture for the building right there. And then I just placed it in there, and instead of making, the lights for the building red, made them blue to kind of fit the color theme of the scene. And that's really all it for the foreground buildings. The next were the background buildings that were too far to really see. They were the low poly buildings. See, and you can kind of see how that fills in the whole rest of the images. And because they're in the background and they're not really the main foreground buildings, they don't really need to be super detailed. The texture just need to look good, and they just need to fit the scene. That's really it. And that's it for the building, the composition of the buildings. The next thing I added was the fog. It was a really simple setup, just like for all my other projects. Just got a volume scatter. Didn't change, nothing else, just nothing else. I did not change, I didn't, go through any of these. Just changed density to 0.001, so very, very low, and kept the entropy at a nice even halfway between 0 and 9. And here in render view, you can see how that affects the scene. Hold on, let me turn off the cold color. There you go. And you can see how that affects the scene right there. The light from the city floor just kind of fills in all that extra area. And that's it for the fog. The next thing I added was just some more variation between the colors of the city. So I added point lights that were a really, really light purple, really high value, really high power, but it gives it a little more purple variation between the buildings. You can see that right there. As it goes further up, you start to notice it less and less, but in the foreground you can see it a lot better, and it mixes the colors really, really well. And then the next thing I added was the signs for all the buildings, and there's a lot of signs in this project. Let me turn those on. And you can see how much it affects the image right here. But some of these signs are so wonky that like they would never pass in like a moving image. But because this is a still image, you can kind of get away with a lot. So for this sign right here, it's not even connected to a building. It should be connected to this building right here. But for some reason, not connecting to the building, kind of placing it in the way of the building to where it seems like it is connected. It just looks a lot better in my opinion. And with all those signs carefully placed in there, it really gives the scene a lot more life, and it already makes the scene look a lot better, as you can see. The textures for the sign is really, really easy, really simple to make. You can just get a sign from like textures.com is where I got all these signs from, and just loop cut all the places where you want to use the signs, just like that. And then when you got all the signs that you want to use, just click on them, and you can do separate by selection, and then you can delete the original image, and there you go. You just got only the signs to work with. And then you can separate by loose parts right here, so they all become their own individual object. And so for each of the texture of the signs, I think I just applied a wave texture, just simple wave texture. Didn't tweak any of the settings, didn't tweak anything else. I just rotated it on 90 degrees axis to make it some cool little scan lines. And then I got our brick texture to kind of create this paneling effect. You can see that right there. And then I mixed those together with two mix nodes set to multiply, plugged into the alpha, and it gives it some nice breaking up, so it gives like this hologram look. And then I just gave it a purple tint with again another multiply mix node, and I just scattered that all over the scene. The next thing I added was really, really easy. Anyone can do this, which is more detail or more lights in between the buildings, like in the far back. And all I did for that was I just added some city art just from all over online. Like this one right here. Let me show you the original. This is the original image. This is a pretty famous Cyberpunk image. You can get literally any image online. I love to go to Pinterest and look at different pictures of cities, like this one right here, or like this one right here, and you can use them, just plug them into the alpha to kind of make it more translucent, and then gave a little purple tint, and it gives a lot more variation. Like already you can see how much more different that is. And I did one very far back. This was just, I think, a city of China, and there's another one right here. This is another Cyberpunk art, but you can see they already add a whole lot of detail. Next thing I added was some spotlights. You can kind of see them right there. the variation in them. Just again, really easy. I just went to Google, I typed in just, you know, spotlights on black background. I can show you what they look like. They would look something like this, but you can just, you know, scale it, make it big, and get the color of the texture plugged into the alpha to make it transparent. And you can mess with the colors, or you can plug the color into the emission. Get a mixed color node, plug in, change it to multiply, crank the factor all the way up so it affects the whole image or the whole color. And you can make this any color you want. And that's all I did for the spotlights right here. Just placed them in where I thought they would look cool. The next thing I added was more detail in this foreground right here. I was like, in my head, I was like, this looks a little empty. So I just added some more buildings I bought online. These are, you can use like you can also just use image textures. That works fine too. But these are just some, I think this pack was like, I don't know, like $10 or $5 online. And they add a whole lot of more detail in this foreground right here. The last thing, or one of the last things I added was the cars right here. I made sure that I wanted the cars to have motion blur. So I did put them on a follow path right here. So the more I go back, you can see the more they change. But I picked a spot where I thought they would look best. Frame 100 is where I thought they would look good. And then if you turn on motion blur and you just click, instead of render animation, click render image, they still show up blurry in the final image, and that's the effect that I wanted. But these cars are from the Kit Bash Cyberpunk cars collection. Just imported them at, you know, really low res 1K images, and then just rotated the wheels to make them more flat. And that's all I did for the cars, really. And then the last thing I added, it's very, very hard to notice in the final image, was some rain. I used an add-on called Baga rain generator. And with that, you can just create a plane and apply the shader. Or not really a shader, you can apply the add-on, and it will add rain that actually works. And when you click play, you can see it actually moves with the scene. Usually you would use this, you know, for like actual like moving scenes and animated scenes. Yeah, that's it for the rain in the scene. And that is really the whole scene. The last thing I would say I added that kind of really surprised me that I thought would work was I found this picture online of like a cool little like nebula of like space. But I just, you know, really simply just plugged it into alpha, made it transparent, made it more glowy. And it actually gave it a cool little effect right there. You can see it with and without right there. And that's it for the whole scene, really. And then as for the settings that I used, I rendered it at 4K, then made the noise, or made the sample count 500. And then one of the things I did do was I turned on mist. You can use Z-Pass, but Z-Pass I found doesn't really always work for me in the past. But if you turn on the mist pass, and then with the camera selected, if you turn on in the viewport display, mist right there, and then you go to world properties, you can mess with this mist pass right here. And what you would usually do is make it go through the entire scene. So then when you render it out, in compositing, you'll have this new mist node right here. And with the mist node, if you just plug that into the viewer or the composite, and then you go back to your render view or your rendered image, it will show the layer for the mist. I can show you guys a picture of what I got for this render. And with that one layer, you can do so much with the image. And here is the Photoshop file for it. Let me turn off everything so far and turn on just the layers. So here is the layers for all the images. The first thing I did was I applied the mist layer right here, and you can kind of see how much that changes already. But with the mist layer, so what you can do is you can find where you saved the mist layer like that. And when you place it in there, line it up with the, you know, the scene that you already have. And at the bottom of Photoshop, if you apply a levels and clip it to just the mist pass, when you mess with the levels, you can mess with the black and white values of the mist layer, and you can isolate certain parts of the images that you only want affected, that you want behind or in front. So for example, if I wanted the mist to be, you know, behind these buildings right here, I would crank the levels to make it, you know, go behind the buildings. And then I would mask this image and hit Control I to invert the mask. And with this, whatever you draw on this mask layer will only be behind the buildings. And if you change it from normal to screen, yeah, it actually goes, you know, behind the buildings like how you want it to, just like that. And that's all I did for the mist right here. But instead of using a normal soft round brush, online I found a pack of free cloud brushes, and you can place them in there just like that. But you know, they're white and you don't want them to be white, you want them to, you know, to be faded, to kind of more colorized, to match the scene a little bit more. So what you can do is you can add a hue saturation, again clip it to the mask, and then change the hue saturation to colorize. Bring down the lightness all the way down so you can actually see the colors change in mask. You can change this to whatever color you want, so like a nice like bluish color, really good right there. You can mess with the saturation, usually around pretty light, and you can turn down the opacity of the original layer right there, or you can even go in with a nice soft round brush and you can tweak it just like that, and there you go. You got some nice cool little mist in there, all from just one layer. You can mess around that in Photoshop. And that's all I did for all this mist down here. The next thing I added was the headlights for the cars. The headlights was a little tedious. So all I did for the headlights was I got an image of just a spotlight. Usually if you double click on a layer, you can just mess with the color if blend if node, or the blend if slider right here, and you can make it from, you know, just mess with it how much as you want. Change it to screen, and got some nice variation right there. And then I would apply a hue saturation to kind of give it a more blue tint like that, and I would place it in both the headlights of the car. But because the car is moving, I also wanted the spotlight to be, you know, to kind of have like this motion blur effect. So with the layer, the spotlight selected, I would just go to filter, blur, and then motion blur. And with this circle right here, you can mess with the direction of the motion blur, and you can mess with the just how much blur it's given. And that's what I did for the spotlight. And then once I got what I was satisfied with, I would click both the hue saturation and the headlights, and I would join them together. And then I would get another hue saturation, again clip it into there, and I would change it to, you know, a more purplish color. But instead of changing the headlights from normal to screen, I would actually use color dodge instead. And then with the hue saturation, I can make it more blue instead of purple, and you can see how that affects the headlights right there. And that's all what I did for all of the headlights right there. And that's really all I did for just like the Photoshop things. And then, I mean, I guess I added like some rain. You can see how that affects the scene right there. And that's really it, all I did for the tweaks of the image. And then to kind of give it this glowing look, what I did was, what you can do is you can, if you hit Control J, you duplicate the layer. You can go to filter, blur, and then just do a regular Gaussian blur, and you can make it blur as much as you want. But that's a lot of glow. You don't want that much glow. You want just a little bit of like a halation look, like that right there. And you would if you mess with the slider of the blend if, it would only show around the bright parts of the image. And if you change it from normal to screen, you can see how that gives the whole thing little bit of a glow, but you never want this much glow. But yeah, you can again just go through the Gaussian blur settings, and you can see, you know, what would look best for your scene. But that's all I did for that. And then after that, I would put it through a camera raw filter. You can see how I tweaked here are these settings I used for the light, the color, the effects right here. Didn't mess with the curve at all. Mess with the color mixer. Here's the luminance. Here's the saturation. Here's what I did for the color grading right here. The detail. And that's really about it. That's all I did for the camera raw, and that makes the colors pop, and it really completes the image. And then last thing was just lens correction. With the lens correction, if you tweak the, I can show you how it changes it. If you mess with the slider for the red, green, and blue, it will give you this nice fringe effect right here. You can see like the red, the RGBs, this nice chromatic aberration. And that was really it for the final image. And then the last thing was just some overlay. I gave it this nice dust particle overlay, change it to color dodge, bring down the opacity, and the same thing with the lens there, change it to color dodge and bring down the opacity. And that is the final scene. I hope this tutorial was easy to follow. I will be leaving like links in the description and stuff for like the items I used, assets I used, and try to find everything I used so you guys can see what kind of stuff I use in these projects. I'll be uploading the second tutorial. It's kind of more of a tutorial on scattering plants, grass, all that stuff, as what it's more focused on. I will be uploading that hopefully next week. But I mean, there's I hope it was easy to follow along. I'm not good to give you tutorials, so if there was anything I missed, just leave a comment. And I hope you guys enjoy your day, and take it easy. I'll see you soon.